After the deadly protests in Charlottesville over the weekend, I sat down one-on-one with Reverend Dr. Jeremy Rutledge of Circular Congregational Church for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Dr. Rutledge, it is so good to see you.
Thanks, Quintin. It's good to see you too.
I appreciate this. You know, it's been, I guess, 72 hours since the tragedy in Charlottesville. Take me to where you are emotionally in your mind.
Well, it's interesting. I had a very interesting response, I think, to Charlottesville. Because earlier in the summer, we had been traveling and had spent some time in Germany. Yeah. And my grandfather had been in Germany as a soldier, and he had fought against Nazis. Mm-hmm. When we were in Germany, we learned a lot about history, and of course, you will not see a swastika, a Nazi flag, you will not see any of that on public display. There's some things in museums, and there's some truth-telling about the history of that, mm-hmm. and the racism and the anti-Semitism. And so we were coming from a country that's been very plain-spoken mm-hmm. about its own sins and about the abuses of the past and the hatred of the past. So we were thinking about all those things. Mm-hmm. And then we flew back to America, the US, and immediately we see Nazi flags here being waved in Charlottesville, carried side by side with Confederate flags, which are also used by white supremacists. And it was really jarring to come from a country that had once been controlled by the Nazis into this country that once fought them, and then see those Nazi banners flying here, and I just kept thinking, what would my grandfather make of this? You know, having fought that far away, what would he make of finding it here at home? And that was particularly jarring. Mm. So there's always been the racism of that far right group and the white supremacist movement that we're now seeing coming to the surface. There's also a deep anti-Semitism, a deep homophobia, all those kinds of things. It really was a shock to the system to see it kind of those flags waved in our faces as soon as we got back. So.
You talk about your grandfather. I know that you wrote, I guess it was August 11th, you wrote something about it on the Charleston City Papers website, that is.
Yes.
And you said this: if your grandfather fought Nazi like mine did, now's the time to speak up. The cause is not lost. I'm curious, what letter would you write to your grandfather right now about what's going on in Charlottesville and really the world?
Right. You know, I almost want to reverse it. I really wish I knew what he would say to us. Mm. You know, because he saw firsthand where this goes. He saw how this kind of hatred plays out. And he saw the aftermath. He saw the ruins of it. So there, more than I would want to write him a letter, I'd want to ask him questions. Mm. What did you see? How does this go? What's the moral witness, you know, that you would have? And I felt like Germans had a very strong sense of how dangerous white supremacy can become, how violent, how destructive, and they would talk about it. You know, so we sit down with German friends or German people, or you go to museums, or you see placards in public. Sure. It's interesting that in Charlottesville, some of the rallying cry, I think, for the white supremacists was that statue of Robert E. Lee. Right. Here we're still celebrating and honoring with statues white supremacists. Like in Charleston, we have Calhoun right in the center of town, who was a proponent of slavery and an ardent racist. So you don't see in Germany Nazi figures being honored or anything like that. And I want to be careful with the comparison here, because those are different contexts. But the conversation in Germany, I think, about white supremacy is much more honest than it is here. Here we talk about things as if they are only heritage, when you can see from Charlottesville, that's not the past, that's not a bygone era, that's the current climate of hate. And people are carrying Confederate flags and Nazi flags side by side in extremely hateful ways. So now my grandfather wasn't the only one who fought. There were millions who fought. And I feel like there are millions of us who could speak for our grandfathers and grandmothers and Americans who really stood for things that we hold dear.
You talk about the monuments here in Charleston. Obviously, we have a plethora of them. And now you have National Action Network, I believe religious director, Nelson Rivers, that is. He says, hey, take those Confederate museum monuments that is down. Where are you in your mind with that?
I'm in agreement with Reverend Rivers. I mean, I think there is a place, and again, I'm borrowing from Germany only because I've just been there.
Right.
And I was trying to learn while I was there. I would put those things in museums and other places. I'm not trying to deny history. I think we should tell the truth about our history. But for me, public monuments, and I mean public, you know, things in our shared public spaces, who we choose to honor says a lot about who we are. The stories we choose to tell and celebrate tells a lot about what we value. So when people come to Charleston, I take them to see Denmark Vesey, you know, take them to see that statue because I want to honor him as a freedom fighter, yes. Or I take them to see the Grimke sisters marker over here on East Bay, and we talk about abolitionists who once worked here, and they were shunned and ostracized, but we want to honor their example. Or the Robert Smalls marker, also on East Bay, you know, just down by Rainbow Row. So I have my own little tour of things that I take people to see, but you have to find them. They're not as public as Calhoun or some of these other markers, and I wish they weren't so hard to find. I wish in our most public spaces we were honoring those who fought and worked for freedom and for the dignity of all people. That'd be something to be really proud of.
Let me take you to August 11th. You said the following on Facebook, quote, I'm not grieved by what is happening in Charlottesville, but heartened by the thousands of citizens who will not let the hate groups go unanswered. A couple of questions. You say that you're not grieved by what is happening in Charlottesville, but what is your message to those who are grieving right now?
Right. And just to clarify, and I added in the comments section, I wrote that in the morning before the man drove his car into the crowd. So I wrote it when people were just protesting and there was some scuffling. And I said, I'm not grieved by this. I'm really heartened that so many people, from the numbers I read, twice as many came out to protest the white supremacists as there were white supremacists. And I have friends who were there, clergy, who were standing arm in arm, and Professor Cornel West was there. And I think some really beautiful people said, you can't come to our town with this hate and expect to be unchallenged. We're going to come out, we're going to challenge that and say, this is not who we are, this is not acceptable to us. So I wrote it in the morning, and I was heartened by that. Then I quickly added, okay, now I am grieved. You know, once white supremacists started killing people, and now I mean the man driving his car into the crowd, then I began to grieve. So, and I was very, very angry as well. And I think maybe a lot of people in Charleston will share this sentiment. So that was Saturday, right?
Yes, sir.
Sunday morning, a couple of years ago, we began our service with 9 roses on the altar table, one for each of our friends and neighbors at Mother Emanuel Amy Church who were killed. And this past Sunday morning, we began the service with 1 rose on the altar table, and we said the name of Heather Heyer, who was the young woman who was killed. And the reason we did is because we said that it was white supremacy and it was racial hatred that killed Heather, and it was white supremacy and racial hatred that also killed our friends at Mother Emanuel. So it's the same thing. And I wonder if that didn't open some wounds again here in Charleston, because Dylan Roof was waving the same kind of hateful banners that they were waving in Charlottesville. And I think for me it brought a lot of that back and showed us that we're still in the same place, and maybe in some ways in a worse place, because I think the president that we have now has played to this racial animosity. He's refused time and time again to reject white supremacy, And so I think we've got white supremacists actually at the top levels of government now, when you look at Bannon and all of those guys. So a lot of stuff is coming to the surface, and it seems to me very ugly.
Let me go back to that quote, because you also said this, but heartened by thousands of citizens who will not let the hate groups, that is, go unanswered. So you mentioned a couple of those hate groups. What do you say to those people who are not letting them really get their way?
You mean the peaceful
Right.
protest? I just think they're living up to our ideals. And we have, as a country, we have never lived up to our ideals fully. So my problem with expressions like "Make America Great Again" is to ask about the again. It was never great for everybody. It never fulfilled its promises for everybody. And so I'd love to make America great.
Okay.
But we've never lived up to our promises from our founding. So I think we all know that. We weren't great if you were an indigenous person living here. We weren't great if you were a person of African descent who was brought here against your will and forced to work as a slave. We weren't great for women who weren't allowed to vote or have equal rights. We weren't, we've never fully realized that promise. So what I would say to the people who peacefully protest and stand up for our best ideals, the things we aspire to, is that I think they represent the best of who we could be, who we have been at times, and who we could be more fully.
And you also said this on Facebook, quote, white supremacists have the torches and the launch codes, but the rest of us have love. The existential question is, what are we going to do with it, unquote. So what are those torches and launch codes in your mind?
Well, I think, so the existential piece of this, Quintin,
Yeah.
is that I'm really talking about existential courage. Because the other thing I might add is the people who protested peacefully had a great amount of courage. So they went out unarmed. I've got friends who went out, all they had was their clergy collars, and they linked arms, and they went in peace, but they said, no, we're not gonna be bullied, we're not gonna be intimidated. And they were standing against people with torches, people with mace, people with automatic weapons that they were openly carrying. So my friend Reverend Jean Pupke, who's a senior minister at the Unitarian Church in Richmond, Virginia, who had gone, I corresponded with her a little, asked what her experience was like. And she talked about when the police asked them to disperse, they did. They were trying to peacefully disperse. And I think she took several different avenues before she found one that was not blocked by armed men with assault rifles who were menacing to her, threatening her, intimidating her. She's just a woman in a clergy collar, just like this. And I feel like ordinary people like her and congregants and students from the University of Virginia,
Right.
others who were out there, had an extraordinary amount of courage. Anyone who's ever been to a protest and you come up against someone else, even just shouting at you, the kind of courage it takes. But then if those people are heavily armed in tactical gear and they're white supremacists, or imagine the kind of courage it took for them.
The simplistic question that is this: where does this discussion go from here, in your mind?
That's maybe the simple question, but it's also the $1 million question, I think. If all of this comes to the surface, well, it has come to the surface, then what do we do? How do we respond as a people? And I think, there are different answers. There's a personal answer. What do I do as a person? How do I respond? There's another question. How do we as a city respond? Are there things we could do here in Charleston that are different, that for our faith community? It's another side of the question. What do we need to be doing and teaching and preaching and working on as a church? How do we tie this in to the movement of love and how we articulate that? So there's so many layers to that question. Maybe I would just say this question belongs at the heart of everything that we're doing. Maybe that's the first step, is anywhere, any time or place we're in a context where nobody's talking about this, it's on all of us to bring it to the table. in some way, and make sure that we're telling the truth and seeing where we are. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was thinking in my head this. If you were to sit down at your computer right now and write a headline for the Charleston City paper, what would it be?
I'm in a funny place because, again, I was out of town during the summer.
Right.
And so I don't know everything that has happened over the summer,
Okay.
and I'm catching up a little, so I don't just want to jump in and act like I know everything. But what really did strike me stepping out for the summer and then stepping back in
True.
is that we're having so many of the same arguments, and that I don't know how much progress we've made. And I don't think we're finished. And so I don't want to say we're stuck, but I also feel like we haven't moved very far. So that to me would be a part of the truth of where we really are. I think since Mother Emmanuel, we're still asking what is going on here. And then now, as I mentioned, I think it might have got a little worse with our current politics and the current administration.
Reverend Dr. Jeremy Rutledge, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
Thanks, Quintin. It's always good to talk to you.
Likewise. Yes, sir.